black history, some people think in terms of what's in the history book. And so it becomes like any other history. I like to think of black history in terms of people rather than books, because it is, after all, the history of people, not just the history of time. And more particularly, I like to think of it as my history, because my family was involved in the history of black people in this country. And after all, our black history is American history. It's not separate from any other history. It's a part of the fabric of this country. Now, in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed something called the Emancipation Proclamation, and a lot of people think that's what freed the slaves. Well, it didn't. First of all, that document said the slaves that to be freed were those in the Confederate States. Well, by that time, the Confederate States had already seceded from the Union. Lincoln was no longer their president, so they promptly ignored it, which meant nobody got freed. In fact, they were at war with the northern states in what we know as the Civil War. Well, the Civil War ended in April of 1865, 2 years later. And even then, the slaveholders were loath to give up that free labor. So it wasn't until Union soldiers actually arrived on the scene that the slaves were freed. They arrived in the towns and in the cities and on the plantations. And those of you who know what Juneteenth is probably know that it happened in Texas, Galveston, Texas, on June 19th, when General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston with his troops and announced from the town square that by executive order, all slaves were free. And the celebration that happened then in Texas became an annual event, and as people migrated from Texas, they took the holiday with them. And so now Juneteenth is celebrated all over the country. And it happened because Union soldiers arrived to tell people they were free, not because Lincoln signed a paper. Now, what does that mean in terms of people? Well, let me tell you what it meant in terms of my family, because after all, I come from, down through the years, from the people who were freed at that time. This is Winnie Carter Henderson, my great-grandmother. And I want to tell you her story, which I call Free. Now, we kids called her Granny, my great-grandmother. She was a slight little lady, about 5 feet tall, maybe 100 pounds. Her chestnut brown skin was set off by silver gray hair, which she wore in 2 braids crossed across the back of her head and fastened into place with old tortoiseshell hairpins. She didn't talk much. She was kind of quiet. She mostly sat in her rocking chair, rocking, sometimes humming old hymns, sometimes knitting. Now, Granny normally lived on her farm in Virginia with her son George, right at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But with George gone, her other children didn't want her to spend the winter months there when the snow closed down the old country roads. So during the winter, Granny stayed with her daughter, Rebecca, who was my grandmother and lived right next door to me. Well, one day, as I was next door visiting, Grandma asked me to stay and keep Granny company for a few hours while she went shopping. Well, now, at the age of 10, I was thought to be a responsible person, so I was pleased. Well, with Grandma out of the house, Granny was much more relaxed. She called me by my name instead of just child, and she even offered me to share an orange with her. And I watched fascinated as she took a paring knife and she went very, very carefully around and around and around that orange, taking off the peel in one single spiral. And then she hung it from a hook over the old wood-burning stove to dry. And this whole time, she was watching me as though trying to make up her mind about something. And then, as though she decided, she started to tell me a story. She said, I must have been 4 or 5 years old the day the soldiers came. I was helping Mama in the farmhouse kitchen because I was still too small to put into the field. We was cooking breakfast. The biscuits, the grits, and the sausage was done, and I was cracking eggs for the scramble when the sound of horses and wagons drew us to the window. We looked out. The yard was full of white men. I'd never seen so many white men before in my life, and they all seemed to have on some kind of uniforms. Well, my mama looked scared. She pushed me on the floor into the corner and told me to be quiet. And then she sat down in a chair, and we waited. We heard loud noises, heavy footsteps on the porch, doors slamming, furniture being knocked over. I recognized the voices of my missus screaming and the massa cussing. After what seemed like a long time, the kitchen door flew open, and a big white man in one of them uniforms stormed into the room. My mama stood up as he asked, "You the cook?" "Yes, sir," she answered. Sniffing the air, he asked, "Is the food ready?" "Yes, sir." "Can you get the field hands in from the field?" Yes, sir." "Then do so at once." And he turned and left. Now, Mama sat down again, and she took a deep breath, like she hadn't breathed during that whole time. And then, telling me to stay put, she got up and she went out the back door to ring the triangle that would bring the field hands in from the field. And she rang the emergency call so they'd come running quickly. And when they'd all gathered in the backyard, about 8 in all, a soldier standing on the porch told them to wash up in the water trough. And when they'd done so, he commanded them to follow him around the house, in through the front door, and into the dining room. Now, my mama had come back into the kitchen, and we waited some more. Pretty soon, that big man was back again. And he told my mama to come and join the others in the dining room. She signaled me to come with her, and I got up and took her hand. The big man noticed me for the first time as we walked past him into the dining room, and he smiled at me. Oh, I was surprised at what I saw. The missus, the massa, her sister, and the 4 grown children were all lined up along one wall. The colored housemaids and the field hands were all seated around the long dining room table, which was fully laid for breakfast. Some soldiers with long guns stood by watching. The big man told one of the soldiers to put 2 more chairs at the table and told my mama and me to sit down, and we did. Oh, it was so quiet as the big man looked at us, one after the other, seated at the table. And then he spoke. "Today, you are free. You don't belong to anybody anymore. You are free. You can leave this place anytime you choose. Now, my men and I will remain here all night tonight, but we'll leave at sunup in the morning. If you decide to wait and come with us, we will give you safe passage to the nearest town. If you decide to leave here today on your own, we will see to it that these folks do not follow you. And if you decide to stay here and work for them, they must pay you wages." Now, do you all understand? I didn't understand what was going on, but I could feel the tension in the room as the field hands looked from one to the other. I looked up at my mama, and I could see that there were tears gathering in her eyes, and that scared me. "Well, since you all understand, let's have some breakfast," he said. And he pulled up a chair and joined us at the table. Mama stood up to go back to the kitchen, and some of the others started to push back their chairs. No, no, sit, sit, he said. Your missus here and her folks will see to the food. And my mama sat back down again. And the food was served by those white women who were stiff and angry. Food was spilled, glasses were turned over, things were dropped on the floor. Some of the field hands wolfed down that delicious food my mama had cooked, while others couldn't swallow a mouthful. My mama and me, we ate a little bit, but that big man, he ate big helpings of everything. And then he got up and left. That was a signal to the rest of us that it was over. My mama stood up, and as I took her hand, she said, "We got to pack." So the next morning, my mama and me, with 2 bundles of our belongings, joined the other housemaids and some of the field hands in the backyard where the soldiers were getting ready to leave. While we were waiting, I asked my mama, "Where are we going?" "I don't know," she said. "Then why are we leaving the farm?" "To be free. To be free." She almost whispered it. "Free? Well, that's what the big man said. What's it mean?" My mama looked at me for a while, and then she said, "Free means that you, child, will never be beat with a bullwhip. Free means that no one will ever take your boy babies and sell them away to somebody else. Free means that no one will ever hang your man from a tree till he's dead and make you watch. Free means that you and I can always be together, and nobody can ever take you from me." And my mama had tears streaming down her face when she spoke. I was afraid I might have said something wrong, so I was quiet, but I tried to remember her words because I knew they were important. The big man shouted, "Move out!" And a soldier picked me up and put me into the back of one of those wagons along with our 2 bundles. And with my mama walking alongside, we pulled out of the backyard and into the old dusty road. Mama looked back only once as we went around a bend in the road and the farm disappeared behind us. And she turned back to the road ahead and she shouted above the sound of the horses and the wagons, "Free, free, free." And in 2 days, we reached a town, and Mama got a job as a live-in cook, and she was paid wages. And that was the start for us of a new life. My granny smiled at me as she finished her story, and we got up from the table and washed the orange juice off our fingers. Granny died the following spring on her farm in Virginia, so I didn't see her again.